So before we get started today, I want to give a content warning. Today I'm going to talk about how we're failing the trans kids in our classrooms. That's a pretty heavy subject, and the last thing I want to do is trigger someone. If that's you, please go watch some videos of puppies or something and know that I care about you. If you're a teacher, or really any adult that works in a school, I want you to keep watching. This is important. And if you don't agree, and you don't think that trans lives are worth protecting, you should get another job. You have no business working with youth. This isn't a question of ethics or religion. This is a question of humanity. Trans lives matter. We are failing our trans kids. Failing to provide for them a safe place for their gender expression, failing to help them feel valid, and failing to treat them with the same respect that we would treat their cisgender peers. At a system level, we are sending a message that transgender youth are something we put up with rather than embrace. And system level is an important marker there. At the individual teacher level, I'm sure you're doing an amazing job supporting your trans students and helping them feel valid in your space. But if the supports aren't there at the highest level, then we can only do so much. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with this. Why do trans lives need protecting? Well, have you watched the news lately? In Texas, they've directed their Department of Family Services to consider medical treatments for trans kids, any kind of gender-affirming care, as child abuse. Think about how ridiculous that is for a second. If you're the parents of a young daughter, say 10 or 11 years old, and you take her to the doctor to get puberty blockers because she shouldn't have to go through the trauma of experiencing puberty as a boy just because she was born with the wrong sex organs, those parents and that doctor can now be investigated for child abuse. The doctor could lose their license, and the parents could lose their child. And teachers who are aware of it and don't report it, because shockingly teachers care about kids, well, they can be fired from their jobs too. It's like out of a dystopia. And then we have sports. In March of 2022, just last month as of this recording, swimmer Lia Thomas became the first openly trans athlete in any sport to win a major NCAA Division I national title. Her accomplishment is massive and should be celebrated, but it's not. Instead, she's been erased from her own story. The talking points aren't even about her. Instead, it's about how trans athletes have a supposed advantage in competition, specifically referring to trans women here. Because, or so the story goes, they have a higher level of testosterone than their cisgender competition, giving them an advantage in sports like swimming. Except that's not true. There is no competitive advantage to being trans. Trans female athletes have testosterone levels well in line with their cisgender peers. It's a straw man argument meant yet again to invalidate trans youth. In the wake of Lia's accomplishment, several states, including our good friend Texas, have introduced legislation to force transgender athletes to compete according to their birth sex. Imagine how dehumanizing that must feel. And lest we think this is something exclusive to the United States, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson also felt compelled to weigh in on the trans women in sports issue. Johnson, whose government is under tremendous pressure right now to ban the barbaric practice of conversion therapy, said at the beginning of April that he doesn't believe trans women should be able to compete in sport. He had no evidence to back this up, just a feeling. Or what about Joanne Rowling? You've probably heard of this one by now, but Rowling, who adopted the initials JK because she was scared that boys wouldn't want to buy Harry Potter if it was written by a woman, has completely invented this idea that male sexual predators will identify as female in order to gain access to women's only spaces and commit atrocities. She's captain of the only women who are born female are actually women team. Never mind the fact that she's completely made this up and there's no record of it happening anywhere. Her anti-trans activism has had her completely ostracized from the fandom that she created. And yet she continues to double down, adding cancel culture to her growing list of complaints. Imagine that everywhere you turned, your humanity was up for debate, that you were being invalidated constantly by the people closest to you. We have right-wing politicians trying to score political points on the back of trans lives. A 2018 study from the University of Arizona found that roughly half of trans male teens have attempted suicide at least once. And 42% of trans youth have at least one prior suicide attempt. And that's before a global pandemic forced them to spend months at a time locked in a house with people who may not be supportive of them. So what can we do as teachers? Because obviously this needs to change. Well, first and foremost, we need to make sure these kids feel valued and loved in our spaces. Call them by their preferred names and use their correct pronouns. It's okay to make mistakes. Nobody is perfect. But you do need to make the effort. But that's just table stakes. You should be working hard to normalize being trans in your classroom. That means using materials from trans creators, changing your language to be gender inclusive, and being an advocate for trans rights on your staff. Does your school have an accessible gender neutral washroom? If not, why? Do you enforce blatantly sexist dress codes that make it impossible for a trans teen to dress as themselves? Push for a rewrite, or better yet, scrap the dress code altogether. And of course, call out homophobia and transphobia wherever you see it. Not just with students, but with staff as well. No, it's not easy, and yes, you may lose some friends, but if you're not an active participant in allyship, then you're not an ally at all. We can't expect our students to call it out when they see it if we aren't prepared to lead by example and do the same thing. Finally, get educated on trans issues. Yes, this video is a good start, but I'm not going to pretend that I'm an expert here. Read A Guide to Gender by Sam Killerman. Visit the Trevor Project. If you're in Canada, check out Get Real or the Youth Project. Do the work. We're teachers. We're supposed to be good at getting informed. I'll make sure all the resources I'm talking about are linked in the description. I'll close with this. Trans lives matter, and it's important to protect trans youth. Listen to the trans voices in your life. And if you don't hear any, make sure you expand your circle. You teach trans kids. They deserve the very best of you. I know this is hard, but all things worth doing are. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next week.